The angry boss of the corporation throws a stack of project documents onto the dark wooden table with all his might. He yells at his subordinate Chen that he has screwed up again, the project is failed and terrible, this project is totally worthless. The boss continues to yell that Chen seems to only pretend to work overtime and that he doesn't see the results of his work at all. Chen stood in his boss's office and bowed his head, feeling very guilty and afraid of his boss. The office was made in light colors. On the ceiling was a white tile with geometric patterns. On the edges of the ceiling was light brown color. The walls were painted in white. On the wall was a painting with a beige frame, and along this wall stood a cream-colored sofa. Next to the sofa was a small bush of plants, and not far from the sofa was a dark wood cabinet. It was evening and the room was lit up by the setting light of the sun. Chen was wearing a white shirt, black tie, gray jacket, and black pants. Chen had red hair hanging down carelessly, gray eyes, a small nose with a hunch, his ears sticking out slightly, and a slight unshaven appearance on his face. The boss kept yelling at him that he was a fool and that his life was worthless. Chen's eyes were very tired. It was obvious from them that he didn't get any sleep at all and rarely rested. The dark bags under his eyes aged him 10 years. The disgruntled boss grabbed the ashtray that had cigarette butts in it aggressively. His hand shook with anger. A second later, the crystal ashtray along with the cigarette butts flew straight at Chen's head. The impact was so strong that blood spurted out of his head. The boss looked 65 years old. He had a bald spot on his head and was gray-haired. He had a thick mustache. He had a mug of coffee on his desk, and on the other side of his desk was a computer with a large monitor. He was very angry with the guy. Chen fell heavily on his back, hitting his head hard on the floor. Blood was flowing from his head, staining the floor made of tile. Crimson stains were everywhere. The supervisor yelled at him to stop pretending and for Chen to get the hell out of here. His hair mussed up even more, his entire face was covered in blood. He exhaustedly continued to lie on the floor, losing hope with each passing second. He realized that he wouldn't survive this blow to his head. He thought that this was death, but he didn't care because he thought he was a loser. His gray eyes slowly closed under the weight of his eyelids. He could feel his strength leaving him. He closed his eyes and fell into an eternal sleep. Several dialogue boxes appeared. Master has been mortally wounded. Binding to the system is in progress. Master is dead. Connection interrupted. Searching for a solution. Received. Reborn. Binding successfully completed. Stand by. Chen started to open his eyes. He saw some silhouette in front of him. He thought that he had been blown away, that he still had work to do, make a report, meet clients, endure the shouting of his boss. Before he could fully open his eyes, the unknown silhouette started shouting at him that he should stop pretending and get out of here. Chen thought he was still being yelled at by the supervisor, so he stood up, holding his head and leaning on his other arm, and agreed with him. The guy was in a completely different place. He was lying in some field. He looked about 10 years younger, like he had moved back to high school. The bags under his eyes were gone, the stubble was no longer on his face, and his face in general looked much better. He was wearing a shirt that was underneath a blue button-down sports sweatshirt. The top button of the shirt was unbuttoned. He also wore blue pants and white sneakers with gray laces. When Chen finally woke up, he looked around at his surroundings and was very surprised. In front of him stood a group of guys wearing the same tracksuits. They were looking at him threateningly. At the head of the group was a tall, muscular guy named Liang Yi. He had long blonde hair slicked back, a black ring pendant hanging around his neck. He rather crossed his arms on his chest and looked at Chen dominantly. The other guys looked at him with a sneer, some even clenched their fists and were ready to beat up Chen at this very minute. They were on the sports field. When Chen looked at the blonde guy, he immediately recognized him as his classmate who had bullied him. Because of this, Chen thought it was all a dream. He sat in the field, scrutinizing everyone across from him. The field was surrounded by a metal fence. The field had a running track with 8 rows, inside of which was a large soccer field. The field was next to 2 basketball courts. There were many beige and brown-colored buildings around them. There were tall trees growing everywhere. Chen thought it was all a dream and not real. He exhaled with relief and lay on his back, relaxing. He thought he was dreaming about his school again. He was expelled from there just because of Liang Yi. Without a diploma, he wasn't hired for any normal jobs, but in the end he was hired as an office clerk. The realization that his fate had been spoiled by the school bully made him clench his fist in anger. He kept thinking that even after trying to get a job as an office clerk, he could only become a sales consultant for a second-rate company. He remembered with disgust those moments when he had been yelled at by his balding boss over little things, and he couldn't say anything back because otherwise he would have been fired. He gritted his teeth and frowned in anger. Chen started to get up from the field. He stood in front of Liang Yi, pointed his finger insultingly at him and started shouting that it was all because of him. Because he was a nobody and could only rely on his parents' money, he intimidated others, but he was incapable of doing anything himself. Liang Yi didn't even listen to him. He swung his leg with all his might and kicked Chen right in the stomach. He even flew backwards and landed on his knees. The surprise and pain made his breath catch. Chen even choked. He grabbed his stomach, feeling a terrible pain. He thought that the pain was too real, as if this wasn't a dream at all. He crouched down in agony, tilting his head downwards. Liang Yi approached him threateningly and crouched down, leaning on the ground. He grabbed Chen by the hair, lifted his head up and angrily asked him to repeat what he said. Chen smiled, feeling fearless and impunity, and said that so many years had passed and the memories were still fresh in his mind. He looked at Liang Yi snidely and asked him if it was all the fault of the incident when Liang Yi harassed their classmate, and Chen interrupted him, embarrassing him. Chen wanted to spit in Liang Yi's face, showing all his disdain and resentment for all the bullying, but the blonde dodged in time, so the spit flew past. Liang Yi let go of the guy's hair, stood back up and walked over to his friends. Liang Yi said that Chen was finished. His friend replied that Chen must be sick of living since he talks to him like that. His other friend said that Liang Yi could have broken his leg or something. Chen contentedly tucked his disheveled hair back into place while continuing to smile. He told them that it was just him after all, and could anything happen to him. Liang Yi's friend said that he would be the first to punch and asked if he could use a technique called brute force technique that he had been taught by him. Liang Yi answered him that he could use it because the school only allowed the body strengthening technique anyway, which was much weaker than his golden body technique. Chen listened to what they were talking about and thought about how this dream even had cultivation. This morning, he was looking through novels about it while hanging around idly, and here was a cultivation dream right now. He grinned, thinking that it was his brain that generated everything. At this time, Liang Yi's friend had already started to use the brute force technique. His body instantly became bigger, big muscles appeared on it, it even made his t-shirt and sweatshirt torn and shattered into pieces. Chen looked at all this with astonishment. He couldn't understand how this guy had increased in height and weight so quickly. He swung his leg, attacking Chen, but his kick ended up hitting the ground. Chen managed to bounce to the side in time, avoiding the blow. The guy's punch was really hard. The ground at the impact site was covered in cracks and formed a small hole. The guy noticed that Chen had avoided the blow, so he swung his fist this time. He swiftly headed towards Chen. Dialogue box, a powerful attack has been detected. The fist almost reached Chen's face, a little more and he would have been horribly injured. However, right before the blow, Chen closed his eyes and shrank back. Several system windows appeared. The strongest defense system has been activated. The system is now in the process of activation. The system activation is fully completed. The system includes divine protection, but external special effects are disabled. Divine defense effect, 100% damage suppression from a person of the same level, 50% damage suppression from a person with a level higher than the host. The damage from the current attack was suppressed by 100%. Liang Yi's friend's fist lightly touched Chen's chest, not causing any damage or harm to him, as if the bully hadn't even swung. He looked at his hand, surprised and panicked that it was too weak. Chen was very relieved, for he was very scared that he might feel real pain again. However, he thought that he was really in a dream since he didn't even feel anything. He grinned, showed his middle finger and teased the guy that he either didn't have any rice in his breakfast or only wanted to tickle him. He mockingly asked if the guy even knew how to fight. Liang Yi's friend was offended by what he heard and tensed up, because it couldn't be that his brute force technique had no effect on Chen. He again tried to hit him several times on his body, but Chen didn't feel anything. The strongest defense system was still in effect. Liang Yi's friend was already exhausted and panicked. He didn't understand anything. After all, he thought that it was impossible. How could such a frail guy not feel his strongest blows? Chen grinned as he looked up at the bulky guy and said that it was his turn. He quickly swung and kicked the guy on the pain point. The guy's face turned pale and his eyes bulged in surprise. The guy grabbed the spot of the kick, shaking in pain and humiliation. Liang Yi and his other friend stared incomprehensibly at Chen, who easily deflected all of the bully's blows. Chen, grinning, asked who was next. Liang Yi got angry at his friend and shouted to him that he should have used Kai energy instead of just swinging his fists and legs. He ordered the other two friends to straighten up Chen. They both used the brute force technique too, increased in height and weight. Huge muscles could be seen on their bodies. The guy's t-shirts and sweatshirts were just as torn as the previous bullies. Chen stood confidently in front of them, crossing his arms contentedly. He thought that he could fend off all the attacks from the group of guys this time too. Now they were going to attack Chen with the three of them. All three of them stood in battle stances, preparing to attack at any moment. The setting sun illuminated the entire field with golden warm rays of light. Chen started to provoke them and shouted at them that they were nothing but the dregs of society, ignorant people who could only bully those weaker than them, threatening guys and girls. System window, it was discovered that they are on the same level as the host. Since only 50% of the damage can be suppressed, please ask the host to be careful and dodge in case of danger. Chen continued to stand still. The first blow landed on his chest, but the defense didn't work. He was thrown back a few meters. The impact on his lungs made him cough, then a cracking sound was heard. It was the guy's bones breaking. 3 of his ribs were broken, bringing him terrible pain and suffering. The guy swiftly rolled on the field from such a blow. Liang Yi's friend had put a lot of force into this punch. His fist even turned red from such a punch. As Chen rolled backwards, he didn't understand what was happening and why the system didn't block this punch. Dialogue box. The divine defense system is the strongest defense in the world, and it can block 100% of incoming damage from those with the same level as the host. Therefore, with the divine defense system, no one with the same level can deal damage to you. But right now, you receive damage because you are too weak. Chen's entire face was covered in abrasions and wounds. He was in terrible pain. He thought how unfortunate it was that even in his dreams, he couldn't do as he wished. Dialogue box. Master, this is not a dream. Your past body actually died because of the blow your superior inflicted. The system showed him how Chen died. A heavy glass ashtray flew into his head. Dialogue box. You are now reborn. You are 18 years old again. And you are on the verge of death again. Reborn. Impossible. He lay on his back exhaustedly, remembering all the events of the last time his boss had yelled at him. The hooligans crowded around him, not giving him a chance to escape. They started kicking him in all parts of his body. Chen tried to dodge the blows, but the blows still hit him. Several system windows appeared. 100% damage suppression. 50% damage suppression. Chen felt all the blows that hit him. Blood started to flow from his head again. A huge swollen bruise appeared on his forehead. His head was being pressed down by someone's boot. Chen gradually lost consciousness from the pain. Several system windows appeared. The host was found to be on the verge of death, activating the recovery function. Estimated recovery time 6 hours. Recovering the liver. Recovering the lungs. Recovering the broken bones. Recovering. Chen woke up and began to slowly open his eyes. He thought about what a long dream this was. He saw the outline of a room in the hospital. Once he fully regained consciousness, he jumped up from his bunk in surprise. He looked around and realized that he was indeed in a hospital. There were white walls, a white tiled ceiling, and light-colored cabinets all around. There was no one else in the room besides him. Chen himself was without a t-shirt. From his clothes he was only wearing gray short shorts. His entire body was bandaged, but there were no bumps, bruises, or scars on his body. He looked at his body and remembered the way he was beaten up by a mob of bullies, how he lost consciousness at the end. He couldn't understand how it happened. His eyebrows furrowed and his mouth was ajar in surprise. He jumped up abruptly and ran towards the window. He examined himself from head to toe in the reflection, seeing no sign of any injury. He shockingly continued to stare out the slightly dusty and dirty window, exclaiming that he was still alive. He asked the system if this was all a dream. He looked up. System window. It was discovered that the host's body had been successfully recovered. If the host is in a near-death state, the system will automatically activate the recovery function. He smiled contentedly as he looked out the window and thought what a great and useful feature this was. Chen spread his hands and told the system that he didn't remember telling it to her before. He also asked the system if there were any other features. System window. The host can open the main panel, which will have all the information they need and can access. The specific way to access the main panel is to focus and visualize that you want to view the panel, then it will appear and only be visible to the host. Chen tensed up, trying to visualize this panel. After a second, a blue-colored holographic table with the Divine Protection System written on it began to appear in front of him. On the main panel was his picture and the necessary information. Master, Chen. Damage rating, 27. Skills, Divine Defense. Items received, 0. Amount of experience, level 1. He looked at the panel for a long time, reading everything written on it. He said that the information was actually laid out in quite a bit of detail, but he didn't understand why he only had 27 points of damage. He realized that he was hit 27 times. It turns out the damage score is when Divine Defense and Heavenly Defense works. Divine Defense was a passive skill that was always active, but one could choose whether to show it to others. He stared at all of this in surprise. His gray eyes were wide open, but he immediately changed in his face once he realized how it all worked. Chen's body lit up with a yellow electric light. He examined his palms. The effect of his ability is that if his opponent has the same level as him, it absorbs 100% of the damage and turns it into a damage indicator. If his opponent's level is higher than his level, the absorption is reduced to 50%. If his opponent's attack power is 10 and he is at the same level as Chen, Divine Defense will absorb the entire amount of damage as long as he only converts one attack point into damage. He schematically visualized this in his head. If someone hits him, he would not take any damage to his health, but he would take 1 point of damage to himself. If the attack power is 10, but the opponent is a level higher than Chen, the absorption will be 50%, which means he will receive 5 points of damage, but his damage value will also increase by 5. He also visualized this situation schematically in his mind. A store with various items such as weapons, gems, potions, shields, books, and energy appeared in front of him. The damage index could be exchanged in the store for some attributes to help in cultivation. There were also lottery tickets and alchemical items. Chen was pensively looking at the items in the store, leaning his hands on his chin and tilting his head slightly. He said that the system was too stupid. After all, he was reborn to beat up others and take revenge, not to be beaten up himself. System window, the following will be the daily system tasks for development. Chen looked at this window questioningly, not understanding what it was about. Several new system windows appeared. The host must perform a set of training exercises such as strength training, flexibility training, and endurance training for 3 hours every day. If the host fails to complete the tasks, they receive a punishment from the system. The countdown for completing the task begins. Countdown 7:36:58. Chen became indignant and asked the system about whether he can train in the cast. Chen lay back in bed. Suddenly the metal door handle twitched with a click. He looked towards the door, snuggled under the blanket. Chattering nurses in white closed high shoes began to enter the office. One nurse told the other that the guy's wounds had already healed and asked why he still hadn't woken up. They both approached Chen's bunk. The second nurse said she had no idea why he was still asleep, but his regenerating powers amazed her. The first nurse agreed with her. After all, it takes a normal person about 10 months to rehabilitate, but he had everything healed many times faster in just 6 hours. Chen coughed to get his attention and show that he was awake. He saw 2 young beautiful nurses in short robes and nurses' hats. Both of them had their hair tied back. The first one had black-colored hair. She also had long bangs up to her eyebrows with 2 strands longer near her ears. She was holding a tablet with Chen's body data. The second nurse had her bangs swept to the side and her brown hair tied up in a bundle. They were glad Chen was finally awake and asked if he felt any discomfort. He, lying on the bunk, asked them how he got here, to which they told him that his classmate Ling had saved him and brought him here. Ling asked them to remind the guy to study hard because there was an exam coming up in 5 days which was very important and Chen's future depended on it. The nurse had a kind face and looked at her patient with a caring look. Chen started to remember what Ling looked like. She was a tall girl. Her hair was about shoulder blades long. On one side, they were tucked behind her ear. Her eyes were a beautiful shade. She had thin straight black eyebrows, and her eyelids were lightly tinted with red shadow. There was a faint pink lipstick on her plump lips. She usually wore a white hoodie along with her school tracksuit and white high-top sneakers. Ling was the academy's first beauty. In the past life, Liang Yi used to harass her frequently. Chen tried to prevent it, but in the end it didn't work out. In this life, he also decided to stand up for her, for which he was beaten up by Liang Yi and his cronies. He didn't even think that Ling would help him and save him. Apparently, she found him on the school sports field unconscious, all bloody and abrasions, and decided to help him by going to the hospital. The nurses looked at him fearfully, for they never got an answer to their question about the boy's condition. They asked if he was doing well. Chen looked in their direction, then lowered his gaze, was silent for a moment and replied that his body was aching, dizzy and nauseous. The nurses looked at him sympathetically and said it was probably the effects of the concussion and advised him to get more rest. The nurses started to leave the room and asked him to stay still and tell them if anything happened. Chen sat silently on the bunk, looking towards the departing girls. He wondered if they really hadn't seen the countdown window above his head. System window, countdown, 6:58:21. He raised his head again, looked up at the window and exhaled tiredly before laying back down. He closed his eyes and thought about not dwelling on it. After all, he had a final exam in 5 days and needed to adjust to the peculiarities of this world. He glanced to his left and saw his blue leather backpack. Apparently, Ling had brought it here while Chen was unconscious. He unzipped the bag and pulled out a history textbook. He decided to read it first. The countdown was still going on. He sat down on the bunk, resting his headboard against it, and began to read the textbook. From there he learned that something called spiritual energy existed in this world. It first appeared on Earth about 3,000 years ago. He began to visualize the contents of the textbook in his head. The man was surrounded by blue air particles. By absorbing spiritual energy, a person could increase his physical power. He imagined a person lifting a huge boulder of 1 ton. As time passed, the research of spiritual became more and more sophisticated. A special system was created, divided into several categories according to the amount of energy. There were a total of 3 main categories, each divided into 3 more, smaller ones. The study of each direction leads to an increase in combat power by several times, maybe even dozens. He visualized a pyramid with 9 divisions, 3 of which were major divisions. There are 3 main ways of cultivation. The first way, absorbing spiritual energy through exercise. He imagined a lighted man practicing yoga. The second way, absorbing pills and all sorts of treasures. A glass vial with a wooden stopper appeared. Third way, gaining experience in a dungeon. It was rumored that the followers of the third way who comprehended it could split mountains and rivers with their feet and pierce the void with their hands. He imagined a group of unknown powerful men. They had impressive muscles and excellent physical form. They stand at the pinnacle of human evolution with high status, power, and money. Chen sighed frustratedly. covered his eyes and said that he hadn't even reached the lowest boundary of the first category. It wasn't even the lowest trait, and no wonder he was bullied. He looked sadly at the book and said that it didn't matter anymore. He felt like he had forgotten to do something very important. He decided not to think about it and just go to bed. He lay down, put his head on the pillow and covered himself with the blanket. Chen fell into a deep, deep sleep, his body demanding rest after the experience. Suddenly, something woke him up. He tiredly opened his eyes. System window. The deadline for the task has expired, and since the master has not completed the task, he will be punished. He looked at the window with shock and realized then what he had forgotten to do before going to sleep. A blue portal appeared below him, framed by a dark aura. The portal formed a vortex and began to suck Chen into itself. He began to fall down the portal, not realizing what was happening now. He couldn't stop it. Suddenly, a black funnel began to open up above the training field. Chen screamed desperately while he was in the blue portal. The funnel opened, throwing Chen out onto the field. There were no walls, it was dark, and only the cold tiled floor surrounded him. Cracks appeared on the tiles from his fall. Chen clucked in pain. He started cursing at the system. Couldn't it have behaved more humanely? It wasn't like he had forgotten about this task on purpose. He asked the system what kind of punishment place this was and what was about to happen. However, the system did not answer Chen anything. Chen got to his feet and turned around at the noise. He saw long dark blue spiked tentacles crawling towards him. Chen looked up and saw a monster that was several times taller than him. Its bottom resembled an octopus, but its red head was shaped like the eyes of a dragon, with long countless tentacles coming out of its head as well. At the back, the monster had a huge red round body, also covered in spikes like tentacles. The frightening monster swung its tentacles straight at Chen, putting him in mortal danger. Chen wasn't quite prepared for this, for he didn't even know what punishment awaited him if he missed the task. He was very scared looking at this monster. He started screaming and swearing, not knowing what he should do now. The monster's tentacles were moving fast. One of them was rapidly preparing to attack the guy. Chen crossed his bandaged arms in front of him, trying to defend himself and minimize the impact. There was no way to dodge. The only thing left to do was to try to minimize the damage. The spiky tentacle hit the head covered by his arms, but it still managed to knock Chen off his feet with ease. He was thrown backwards, stunned, and began coughing up blood. He fell on his back, flying a few meters after being hit. He stepped back from the impact, coughing and screaming out how much it hurt. He turned to the system again and asked why it was doing this to him, since he had already been beaten in reality, and why it was happening again already in this place. Several system windows appeared. Since the host had failed the daily task, he was forcibly moved to the rental for punishment. Punishment task, evasion. Goal, evade 50 attacks in a row. There is no time limit. Warning, if the host fails the task, he will remain in the punishment arena forever. Note, if the host is wounded multiple times and cannot move around the punishment arena, the system will activate the accelerated recovery function. The bandaged Chen turned around and looked at the spiky beast that was menacingly moving its tentacles in all directions. He swallowed nervously and couldn't believe what he saw. How was he supposed to dodge the attacks 50 times in a row? Sweat began to run down his face from the exertion. The monster began to swing its huge blue spiked tentacles a second time. Chen calmed down, assumed a posture that would be comfortable to dodge from, and thought that he had already died once before and could handle this monster. He carefully watched the monster's movements and tried to figure out at what point he should start dodging its attacks. After a couple of seconds, he shouted that it was time. The menacing red monster tried to strike Chen with its powerful tentacle again, but he bounced to the other side in time and remained unharmed. Even his cast didn't hinder him in this case. He looked at the monster contentedly and chuckled. He proudly said that this attack was so unpredictable that even its speed didn't affect it, because as long as he could predict the direction of the attack, he wouldn't have any problems. However, Chen started to rejoice too soon. In the next instant, the monster attacked him from behind with lightning speed, hitting the back of his head and back of the guy. The attack was so strong that not only was he thrown sideways again, he also had a tooth knocked out of his jaw. He fell on his back again, flying several meters in the air as the monster continued to move its limbs violently. Chen quickly regained consciousness and got to his feet, rubbing his cheek in pain. He cursed at it and muttered to himself that the monster had already started attacking from different directions. Chen kept receiving damage from the monster from different directions, in the face, in the back, in the eye, in the stomach. His whole body was covered in bruises and cuts from the huge tentacles. His bandages started to come undone and tear in different places. He tried to catch his breath after the unequal battle, his face aching from the constant blows on it. Suddenly, the tentacle stopped wriggling from side to side and straightened up. Its end also grew spikes, and the end itself became as sharp as a blade. It headed towards Chen's leg and then pierced through it, piercing through all the muscles and bones there. The monster pulled the tentacle out of Chen's thigh, causing it to bleed profusely. Unable to stand steady on his feet anymore, Chen fell on his injured leg. The monster's kick had left a gaping hole in his leg that could not be looked at without horror. Blood flowed down to his knees. Chen had run out of any strength for any action. He fell on his face with a thunderous crash. There were a huge number of abrasions on his body. His head was also punctured and bleeding. He was in terrible pain and couldn't move anymore. A huge pool of purple blood formed under his head. He began to gradually lose consciousness. System window. It was detected that the host was in a critical condition. The activation of the recovery function was starting. Chen's body was surrounded by blue energy that completely covered him from head to toe. The wounds began to heal quickly. Only small scars with bruises remained from the previous cuts. System window. Within the walls of the punishment arena, the recovery speed was increased by 1,000 times. The approximate time to fully recover is 3 seconds. The force was instantly able to lift Chen to his feet. His red hair was lifted upwards by the blue aura hovering around him. System window. The recovery process is complete. Mon started swinging his limbs again. One of the tentacles was heading towards Chen. He was able to get rid of the torn bandages and cast on his left leg, his movements no longer hampered by anything. He stood firmly on his feet and said that he would no longer be surprised by a surprise attack. A flying tentacle attacked past Chen. He dodged quickly enough to avoid taking additional damage. Without the bandages, Chen's body could be seen better. He was of average height, skinny, but still had a little muscle mass that allowed him to be mobile in any situation. He beckoned the monster to him with his hand and said that his suffering was not in vain, and he was now used to its speed, and if the monster was not afraid, then let it attack again. The tentacles began to wriggle rapidly, intertwining with each other. Chen was not only used to its speed, but he began to feel some warm energy flowing through his body. He stood in a fighting floor, carefully observing all of the monster's movements. Although he wasn't sure what that warm flowing energy was, but one thing was certain. His physical condition was much improved and he could now move with ease in a way he never could before. He leaned back slightly, avoiding the attack hitting his body while not putting in a tremendous amount of effort. The tentacles swept right over his head, but they never managed to reach their target. They began to return back to their master. Chen smiled nonchalantly and pointed his thumb downwards. He began to wryly tell the monster that they were still far from the 50 attack mark and asked if that was all the monster was capable of. Chen pointed at the monster with his index sign and excitedly told him that he would defeat it today and proudly leave the arena for punishment. The monster stood a couple of meters away from him as it continued to wriggle its small tentacles around his head and back. Its eyes burned red and glared threateningly at Chen. It started to lift its large tentacles upwards, and then pointed all of its sharp tentacles from all over its body towards Chen. They turned into thousands of blades flying straight at the guy who was already sure that he would win. He looked at the monster in astonishment and incomprehension and could only let out a questioning sound. After a moment, the huge tentacles approached the body of the guy, who lost all confidence and motivation in that second. This was the end, he thought. The tentacles started piercing and slashing him from all sides, giving no mercy. They didn't stop for a second, preventing the poor guy from even taking any action to defend or dodge. He clucked irritably and realized that he couldn't resist now. He only covered his head with his hands and leaned his left knee against his torso. It was very painful. Chen thought that he was definitely going to die now. The tentacles continued to stab him, leaving behind scarlet cuts. Suddenly, there was smoke all around, and the monster stopped attacking the young man, removing all the tentacles that had been released. Chen's entire body was covered in cuts, and he once again lay exhaustedly on the tiled floor, having lost consciousness. Several system windows appeared. The host was found to be in critical condition. The automatic recovery function was activated. The estimated time for full recovery is 9 seconds. The blue aura once again covered Chen's entire body. The wounds quickly healed, leaving no trace of the cuts, but there were still some small scratches on the young man's face. He looked at his hands, which were in the process of healing. Even though the wounds had healed, the pain was still present. System window, recovery has been fully completed. The host can continue to pass the penalty test. Chen began to rise to his feet with difficulty. System window, the progress of the task is 0. He wiped the dirt from his face with the back of his palm and said that the external injuries were healing, but the pain from the beating was still there. In addition, a warm stream of energy continued to rage in his body. He could feel the warmth of the energy concentrated in the area of his abdomen, flowing smoothly throughout his body. He looked down and saw that the energy looked like small flames of yellow-colored flames. He confidently stood in front of the aggressive monster preparing to attack the young man again, and excitedly said that as long as he was able to recover, he still had hope of victory. The monster probably didn't even hear or understand these speeches. After all, it was a simulation. He pointed all his curly limbs at Chen, who stood nonchalantly and was no longer as afraid as the previous times. His face looked confident, even somewhat venturesome. There was a glint of hope in his eyes, and his lips showed a confident smile. Even being surrounded on all sides by tentacles, he remained cool-headed. The monster launched an attack, twitching one tentacle and the other. Chen successfully dodged the incoming blows while remaining calm. His body was working at 100%. He moved his legs, bouncing off limbs. He swiveled his neck and back, avoiding damage. Several dialogue boxes appeared with the progress of the task. 3 out of 50 were completed. Suddenly one light punch did hit the guy's shoulder. Dialogue box, the host took damage. The progress counter was reset to 0. Task progress 0 out of 50. He continued to perform multiple dodges, but took damage time after time. A dialogue box appeared. Master is in critical condition, activating self-recovery function. Chen's body had once again recovered from all attacks. Not a single scratch could be seen on his body. He once again fearlessly confronted the monster that didn't even think of stopping attacking the guy. It didn't give him a break. The tentacles surrounded him everywhere as if there was no escape from them. 3 hours later he was still fighting him. He was bouncing and trying to dodge in the air. Several dialogue boxes appeared with the progress of the task. 24 out of 50 had been completed. The host took damage. The progress counter was reset to 0. Task progress 0 out of 50. He tried again time after time, despite the failures and the damage he was taking, which recoiled in horrible pain in his body. 6 hours later, his punishment was still going on, but his task progress was much closer to the 50 mark. He diligently dodged side to side from the red and blue tentacles. Chen did not lose his concentration even though he was already breathing heavily from fatigue. Finally, he saw the coveted dialogue box, task progress 50 out of 50. He stopped and tried to catch his breath. He was already struggling to stand on his feet, and he had no strength to hold his arms. The spiky monster he was fighting turned completely blue and began to disintegrate into pixels and disappear from the punishment arena. Dialogue box, the punishment task has been completed. Master will now be moved out of the punishment arena. Chen was terribly tired. He was sweating profusely, however he was very happy to be back in the old world. Someone shouted in the darkness, asking what had happened, and asked someone to get a doctor. At this time, Chen had managed to change into white striped pajamas. He sat on the hospital bed and quietly read a textbook. The room was illuminated by the sunlight. A nurse entered the room and said in a kind voice that his injuries had been successfully treated to the point where he had even started studying again, even though he was still in the hospital. Chen replied to her that he had an important exam coming up after all and needed to work hard on it. She was awkwardly silent at first, not knowing how to tell him the bad news. But soon she did tell him that it was better for him not to go for the exam. Her face looked worried and something was troubling her. Chen, with a calm smiling face, asked why he should not take the exam. She replied with a guilty face that this morning Liang Yi came to the hospital and made a scene. He wanted to get to Chen. Even though the head manager of the hospital was able to handle everything and he was not allowed in, Liang Yi shouted one last time that he would beat Chen the next time he saw him outside the hospital. And he even used all his connections to eliminate Chen from the exam list. Chen couldn't believe what he heard, his face showing fear at first. Next to his bed, he had a nightstand with a small screen and a stand with an IV. However, exactly a second later, he jumped up from the bunk next to the window and holding the book in his hand, yelled as loud as he could. He couldn't believe that Liang Yi had actually gone to such measures. The nurse was writing something down in a sheet on the clipboard and worriedly said that he had better stay here and rest properly. Otherwise, Chen might face danger when he left the hospital. Chen simply remained silent as he saw the departing nurse off. As she left the hospital room, she sighed and said that she really sympathized with the guy and that he shouldn't try to be a good person anymore. She quietly walked out of the room, covering the door, while Chen looked out the window at the buildings and houses at the same time. Chen's face took on an annoyed look, and while he was looking out the window, he wrinkled his nose and frowned. He was thinking about how despicable Liang Yi had acted, and he was even worse than Chen could imagine. Chen's gloomy face soon changed to an evil smile. He clenched his palm into a fist and said to himself that since Liang Yi is so ruthless, he will do the same to him. A system window about the daily task has appeared. The host must perform strength, stretching, and endurance exercises for 3 hours. If the task is not completed, the host will be punished. Chen looked at the window and decided that 3 hours of training would not be enough for him to straighten out Liang Yi afterward. He decided to skip the training so he could enter the punishment arena again. He sat in his chamber until the sun began to set. He waited for the punishment window to appear, for that was where he could practice on enemies stronger than him. After a while, a system window appeared in front of his eyes. Deadline has expired. The host will be moved to the punishment arena. Chen humbly waited for the teleportation. Suddenly, a portal appeared above his head, which sucked him in and started moving Chen. His goal was once again to dodge 50 times in a row. He was teleported to the punishment arena again. He was already being attacked by enemies. They were humanoid creatures with long sharp claws on their hands. Their body was gray in color and they had red growths on their heads, resembling a mask or helmet. Chen looked at them excitedly, smiling and happy, then decided to start the task. All the monsters jumped at him at once, trying to wound him with their huge claws. Chen remembered his past experiences and diligently dodged the monsters, trying to finish the task as early as possible and not lose the task counter. The monsters attacked him time after time without sparing Chen. He couldn't even tell how many approximately there were. After a while, he completed the quest. Their battlefield was covered in a haze, dust rose into the air and stood there. He started to come out of that smoke. The guy's hospital pajamas were ruined. His whole face was scratched and his pajamas were torn on his chest, sleeves and bottom. He felt tired, however he realized that it was worth it. A system notification appeared in front of him, your reward. Kai blood increase. He saw that the Kai blood level bar had increased and also he was given some experience. The guy looked at this notification and said with an astonished look that he could already feel himself getting stronger, however, it was not enough to defeat Liang Yi. Chen already wanted to leave the punishment arena, closing the notice as something suddenly started falling on him from above. With surprise, he cried out and jumped up. The next moment, a new system window appeared in front of him, stating that a hidden task could be started, challenge the Hammer of the Abyss. Rank a reward for completion, increase blood Kai. Chen looked at the notification puzzledly and wondered if it was worth accepting this quest. He realized that if he completed this task, he would be able to reach the martial arts realm and meant that he no longer needed to fear Liang Yi. He happily pressed the accept button, grinning at what a question this was. He looked at the task with excitement and said that he had not forgotten his true purpose of being in this arena. The arena began to collapse, changing its appearance slightly. Chen didn't realize what was happening, started looking around. He turned around and saw a huge purple shiny stinger shaped like a hammer heading towards him. Chen didn't have time to orient himself, so the sting struck him with all his might, throwing the young man to the other end of the arena. The impact was so strong that after Chen fell, the tiles on the floor broke, forming a pile of stones. The tiles on the wall cracked as well. Chen did not expect such a strong doctor. He wiped the protruding blood from his chin. He stood up and was able to get a better look at the monster. It was a giant monster the size of a 5-story house. It had 6 legs with powerful steel claws on its toes. Its head resembled the face of a dragon with huge fangs, its eyes glowing red. In front of the monster was a system notification with a mission objective. It needed to survive for 30 minutes. Chen looked at the monster thoughtfully and thought that it was a powerful strike, and the Abyss Hammer wasn't called a boss for nothing. System window. Host is in critical condition, activating self-recovery function. Chen diligently ran away from the boss's attacks and thought that it wouldn't be difficult to last 30 minutes because it had the auto-recovery function. The Abyss Hammer tried to crush him with its gigantic legs, breaking the floor beneath him due to its powerful attacks. Chen had already struggled to start running away and dodging. The monster crouched in front of him and roared loudly. Its jaw was so huge that it could easily just swallow the guy. Chen realized his mistake, for the Abyss Hammer would not wait for Chen to fully recover. He tried to run away, but the monster swung its stinger and tried to strike at him. Chen was able to get far enough away to avoid the direct attack, but the shockwave pushed him forward, causing him to spend a few seconds in the air before falling on his stomach. He began to realize that the monster really wanted to kill him. He struggled to lift himself up with the help of his arms. Then he saw a new system window. Master has been seriously injured. His recovery time was increased and his efficiency was reduced by 10%. He shockingly read this notice, feeling hopeless. The monster approached him again, raising its hammer-like stinger. In the middle of the sting, something resembling a starry sky or space could be seen, as if it could swallow Chen. The Abyss Hammer launched an attack. Chen desperately tried to defend himself. He crossed his arms in front of his head, however it didn't help him at all. The monster at this time kicked his feet on the ground, and Chen was hit by the monster's direct attack. He screamed deafeningly, feeling the worst pain. His arms were broken in several places, especially his forearms. He was lying in the crater formed after the attack. Chen couldn't stand it and started crying. He was desperate and was already ready to give up. He waited to recover. It seemed to him that he hardly felt any pain anymore due to his many injuries. Several system windows appeared, stating that the effectiveness of recovery was decreasing until it was down by 70%. Chen thought that he was about to die again. System notification. Master is in critical condition. Please leave the punishment arena. Leave the arena, yes or no? With his broken and shaking hand, he could barely reach the answer buttons and was already ready to abandon the task and leave the arena. He reached for the affirmative answer button, then stopped at the last one and thought for a moment, staring at the window. He started to remember all the moments when he was already ready to give up and almost die. How the boss had hit him in the head with a heavy ashtray in his past life and he died from it. How Liang Yi and his friends had beaten him to a pulp. He thought that the same thing is happening now as it was then. He's being beaten again, broken again. Could he do it all again? He couldn't let it happen again. If he couldn't change anything, then what was the point of it all? this rebirth. He gathered his will into a fist and tearfully decided to refuse to leave the punishment arena. The reason he's here is to protect his own pride and sense of dignity. The second he pressed the refuse button, the monster swung its stinger again. The shockwave threw the guy so far away that he slammed into the wall with all his might. He flew a few meters and thought it was very dangerous. If he didn't avoid hitting his weak point and didn't use the power of his Abyss Hammer attack to move to escape in time, he would already be dead. He grinned viciously at the monster. All of his clothes were tattered and his body was covered with numerous wounds. Even regeneration couldn't heal his broken arm. He was holding on with his last strength. His hair was disheveled and his eyes were swollen with tears. Chen carefully watched the Abyss Hammer as it swiftly approached him. He thought that he should calm down, because this monster was not only extremely strong but also very fast. Its attack and movement speed was high. The monster was reflected in his eyes. A pillar of dust rose up around the monster. As the Abyss Hammer approached him, the monster struck again with its stinger, but this time Chen managed to escape and move to another corner of the arena, avoiding the attack. Chen realized that if he had any weaknesses, it was his low kai. Chen grabbed the wall and looked at the monster, which was looking at the guy hanging on the wall incomprehensibly. Because of the monster's low kai, its attacks were too straightforward and easy to read. It no longer mattered how strong the Abyss Hammer was, because Chen could always utilize the environmental effects from its strike, thus keeping a safe distance between them. Dodging attacks wasn't easy, but Chen realized that he had to anticipate the direction of the attack, then push off from that spot and choose the direction he wanted to go after the strike. Fortunately, the arena was large enough to carry out his plan. The Abyss Hammer once again struck the wall where Chen was with its stinger, but he noticed the attack and realized its direction, then used a push and jumped back to another wall nearby. He pressed himself against it again. As long as Chen wasn't cornered or pinned to the ground, he would have enough room to dodge using the monster's own attack. As time gradually passed, he was generally able to stick to his own tactics, but sometimes the attacks would still reach him, dealing damage. He was extremely exhausted. At the 29th minute, he was already struggling to move. At this time, the monster attacked again, throwing the guy back against the wall. He sat down exhausted, his whole body aching. He could no longer control his limbs. His strength was running out. The monster roared menacingly in his face and swung his main weapon again. Chen prayed that the last minute would pass as quickly as possible, for he no longer had the strength to resist the damage and dodge the attacks. The hammer was in flight, and the moment it was about to finish the guy off, Chen smirked. The time counter stopped and showed 30 minutes. The test was over. He was moved back to the hospital room, to his bunk. Chen was immensely happy that the trial was finally over. He collapsed onto his bed and fell asleep almost immediately. Several system windows appeared: reward for the hidden task, blood and kai increase, and improvement of the host's condition. The host is in critical condition, activating the self-recovery function. The approximate recovery time is 8 hours. The next day, Chen was already dressed in new pajamas, his head was bandaged, and he had a crutch by his side that he could use to move around. He flipped through the book looking for some information, which he did find, and exclaimed happily about it. The book had a picture of a person with energy circulating inside, a dark aura around him. Next to it was written that a person who studied cultivation was able to accumulate kai and blood and then transform them. Kai and blood, strength, energy, attack and defense improved greatly during training. Chen could finally see his blood and kai. It was concentrating in his right hand at this moment. He was finally able to become a martial arts master. System window, rank D task, score 100 points during the exam. Reward hidden. Chen carefully read what was written on this window and grinned happily. He continued to look at his blood kai and said that he wanted to surprise Liang Yi with his strength. The day before the exam, the assembly hall. The students were in a hurry because someone said that someone was provoking Liang Yi in the assembly hall. Such audacity had not been seen before. The others shouted that they should look at this and the daredevil while he was still alive. The weather was good, the sky was cloudless, and the sun was shining brightly. On the huge white stage stood Chen. He was holding a mouthpiece in his hand, and on his feet were his usual house slippers. He was still bandaged and moved with the help of a crutch. The stage itself was outside. There were a huge number of people crowded around the stage. Everyone was curious about what was about to begin. Chen proudly raised the horn and shouted loudly into it, addressing Liang Yi. He urged him to approach him. He was silent for a second, looking at the crowd, and then shouted again to Liang Yi that he was here and let him come out to him. The crowd of students looked at him worriedly, not understanding what Chen was trying to accomplish. They started to talk amongst themselves that he was provoking Liang Yi. Another guy asked if the guy had escaped from the mental hospital since he was shouting such things to the whole school. Someone agreed with him, because he thought a normal person wouldn't provoke Liang Yi. His friends started laughing and teasing Chen, saying he wants to die young. Two guys moved away from the crowd near the stage. One of them said that they should hurry up and inform Liang Yi, and for that he would take them as his ward. The second guy agreed with him. He said that if they could get Liang Yi's respect, they would have a bright future. Chen fairly watched the crowd's reaction, then decided to escalate the situation to the extreme. He picked up the mouthpiece again and started shouting that Liang Yi was shameless, acting like a rat wandering aimlessly on the ground. That all he was doing was looking for his own kind. He didn't forget to mention his family, saying that if Liang Yi's family earns prestige this way, what's the point of society like him, and that if Liang Yi is looking for a fight, let him look for peers. He also questioned how he could have even hit on the academy's first beauty, his girlfriend Ling. He added that there are many good girls, but none of them would want to have a relationship with Liang Yi. Chen decided to finally insult him by saying that it is customary for a person to be isolated in case of mutation, so why didn't Liang Yi's father do that to him? Chen shouted so loudly that it was as if the entire academy could hear it. Finally, he let go of his crutch and raised his index finger up, and in a calmer voice, he said that he forgot to add the fact that he was not only declaring war on Liang Yi today, but also wanted to supplement his speech with a small announcement. He paused for a moment and then, smiling broadly, loudly announced that from this day forward, Ling would become his girlfriend, and if Liang Yi dared to approach her again, he would break all of his limbs, gouge out his eyes, and deprive him of the ability to continue his lineage. He shouted to the crowd that he was waiting for Liang Yi outside the academy tonight. The crowd was shocked at Chen's impudence, they were even taken aback and all stepped back. The students began to talk among themselves, saying that the guy would die if he really dared to stand up to the bully, because everyone knows that Ling has long been attracted to Liang Yi. Others said that Chen had had enough of life since he had fallen in love with Ling and he was definitely finished now. Some asked if Chen had had such a bad life. Someone joked that next year they would see him at the Qingming festival, which is dedicated to the dead. His friend answered him that the main thing was to remember to bring ritual offerings to his grave. At this time, the beautiful Ling was standing away from the crowd with a friend who told her that Chen had confessed his love to her. Ling became very shy and her face covered with blush. She put her head down out of embarrassment. She frowned her thin, neat eyebrows, pressed her lips together and thought, what was Chen thinking? Shouldn't he be afraid of Liang Yi? Chen at this time continued to shout something from the stage. Ling watched this and continued to ponder. After all, Chen had helped her when she was being harassed by Liang Yi, so she should at least do something to help the brave young man. There was a beige building near the stage, from the top floors of which someone was staring intently at Chen who kept pushing speeches. It was Liang Yi. He glared angrily at the guy leaning on the black windowsill. He gritted his teeth with anger. Just a little more, it was as if he would explode. Liang Yi couldn't believe that Chen had the nerve to say so much to the entire academy. Liang Yi continued to closely observe Chen's actions from the height of the 6th floor, mentally muttering his name. He was watching the guy from the window in the principal's office. The principal himself was watching the action together with Liang Yi. The principal was a slightly fat man. He was shaved short, wore thick-rimmed black glasses, and was dressed in a white shirt, black pants, and brown leather formal shoes. In his office, he had a desk with a computer. Liang Yi menacingly ordered the principal to admit Chen, pointing a finger at the guy. The principal chuckled nervously, and trying to smooth things over, told Liang Yi, calling him master, that Chen was just a stupid kid, asked him to ignore him and not to take what he shouted from the stage into his head. He said to just let Chen expel from the academy and Liang Yi would never see him again. Liang Yi smiled and furrowed his brows. His face looked crazy. He clenched his hands into fists and said that if he let Chen leave now, he would never be able to take revenge on him again. Liang Yi could not allow him to move on after what Chen had done. The principal tried to oppose him as gently as possible, saying that they had spent a lot of effort and time to expel Chen from the exam, and now they would also have to reinstate eligibility back. Liang Yi looked threateningly at the obese principal with his arms folded on his chest and asked if his words were a refusal. The principal tensed up, not knowing what was in store for him next. The principal smiled humbly, rubbed his hands together and said that he couldn't refuse him and would handle the recovery right away. As soon as Liang Yi left his office, the principal sat down at his desk and started filling out the necessary paperwork for Chen's reinstatement for the exam. He sighed loudly and said that someone would definitely die this time. Exam venue. The exam was held in a specially equipped room. There was a portal with white pillars on the edges, with beautifully carved wind symbols on them. The portal itself was glowing blue. The students stood in 4 rows, listening attentively to the instructions of the headmaster standing to the right of the portal. He began to say that there were a huge number of dungeons scattered around the world, each one representing a different world, each with many monsters. Of course, the cave that the students would go to today was not real. It was created especially for the exam, but they were still very dangerous. The principal pointed at the portal and said that this was the entrance to the virtual dungeon and the entrance to the exam arena. The students would have to undergo trials to pass the exam. The man took out 2 items, a wooden plaque and a flare. One of these items was directly related to the test and the other was needed for the safety of the students. Both items were small and would fit quietly in the palm of the hand. The wooden plaque had a rope at the bottom that would be convenient to hold it by. And the flare was like a small scroll. It also had a rope, but it had to be pulled to make it work. The director announced that there would be 3 challenges: competing for the plaques, killing the boss, and finding a way out of the dungeon. The purpose of the first challenge is a battle for plaques. The more plaques the students get, the more points they have. Apparently, for every tablet a student obtained, they received 100 points. The same went for fighting monsters. The more kills, the higher the points. For each monster kill, 100 points were also given for each monster kill. After completing these 2 tests, students would need to find an exit to complete the exam. The principal also said that the overall ranking would be posted after all the students had passed the exam. The principal began to explain why the flare was needed. If a student could not find a way out or was in danger, he could use it, after which a mentor would come to him and save him. This was the end of the explanations for the exam. The students began discussing the exam itself with each other and thinking about how to pass it. The 3 dark-haired and short guys decided to start teaming up and acting together, because then their points would be many times higher. They discussed that although the dungeon was artificial, it was still dangerous and the monsters were incredibly strong, so teamwork was the best option for them. The other participants in the exam were also forming teams. The blonde-haired guy with blue eyes and his friend with dark hair were discussing that people who would be left without a team risked being surrounded and would simply lose their wooden plaques. Liang Yi was standing next to his entourage. They aggressively glared at everyone around them, and Liang Yi said that Chen had crossed his path for nothing. Because of this, no one would dare to join him. A loner like Chen would inevitably die. The whole company threateningly and sneeringly looked at Chen, who was looking at the flare. Liang Yi said that Chen would not escape anywhere, for all the students of the academy obeyed him. He envisioned himself as a puppeteer who could control everyone in this academy and could order them to do anything. Chen continued to look at the signal rocket and said that even the teachers couldn't control everything that happens in the virtual cave. That's why they gave each student a signal rocket. He gloomily looked down and said that this was definitely the perfect place to discreetly eliminate someone, and there was no way Liang Yi would miss such an opportunity. He raised his gaze and looked at Liang Yi and his company, who were intently watching Chen. Around them, the students were still chatting and forming teams to take the exam. Chen smirked confidently as he looked at them, for he had been practicing hard in the punishment arena. He thought about how Liang Yi would soon regret everything. His pondering was interrupted by someone calling Chen by name. He looked around and saw his classmate Ling. She timidly approached him and asked if he wanted to team up with her, because it was dangerous to go there alone. She said that they should help each other. Chen pointed at Liang Yi and his friends and asked the girl if she was worried about Chen insulting Liang Yi. She smiled radiantly back and enthusiastically replied that she wasn't worried because it all happened because Chen wanted to protect her from Liang Yi. She added that she wasn't just a girl. Ling jumped up and raised her fist in the air, saying that she was actually very strong. Ling started to point out that she was pretty pumped up, to which Chen smiled and realized that she was obviously worried about him and added that girls at that age are too easy to read through. Chen told her that he was only too happy to team up with her. They started heading towards the portal together. The people around looked at them with incomprehension and thought that the guy wouldn't survive this exam. Liang Yi's henchman pointed his finger at them and informed their leader that Ling and Chen had united into one team. Liang Yi was beyond furious. He gritted his teeth and viciously escorted them with a glare. The principal announced that the exam would begin soon and ordered the students to line up and start entering the portal one by one. He pointed his hand towards the portal, which brightly lit up the entire room with a blue light. The first to go into the portal were Liang Yi and his friends. He said that once they entered the cave, they would immediately start attacking, to which his entourage responded positively. They entered the portal, moving into a virtual environment. Chen confidently said that it was time for them to go as well, and Ling happily agreed. It seemed like they were not afraid of anything. The guy and girl went through the portal. Chen started looking at the exam site in amazement and Ling clapped her hands happily. They found themselves in a forest with tall trees, bright sunlight shining through their leaves and crowns, illuminating the green clearing. A light breeze blew, which lifted the leaves from the ground into the air. They swirled. Chen put his hand under a leaf and it landed right on his palm. The young man looked at his palm in surprise and realized why the examiners said that this cave was as close to the real one as possible, because even the leaves seemed real. He heard numerous approaching footsteps from outside. It was Liang Yi's army coming, which was heading straight for Chen. Liang Yi aggressively said that Chen looked too relaxed and also took the time to admire the nature. Chen covered Ling with his body, preparing to protect the beautiful girl. The entire crowd began to knead their fists and prepare to attack. All eyes were directed directly at Chen. Liang Yi cracked his knuckles and told Chen to think hard and decide how he would choose to die. The sky was blue despite the slight cloud cover, and the sun was shining brightly. It illuminated the faces of the hooligans with their hands in their pockets who were about to massacre Chen. Liang Yi stood at the head of the crowd, crossing his arms on his chest. He looked at Chen with a nonchalant face, then asked him if he was going to die. The crowd took their hands out of their pockets and began to surround the guy and girl. Chen held firm and didn't show any uncertainty, but Ling was very worried. The girl looked at her friend anxiously. She thought that things hadn't gone according to plan. She originally wanted to just wander around the dungeon with Chen and didn't think that Liang Yi would catch up with them so quickly. Chen smiled at her, showing her a thumb, and said that she could not worry and asked her to trust him. The girl wanted to stop the guy, for she was very worried about him, but Chen interrupted her and told her to rest aside and not to approach them in any way. He confidently walked towards the bullies, ready for a fight. Ling only had to stand silently and watch, hoping that Chen would be alright. She furrowed her eyebrows, small droplets of sweat dripping down her face. There were large rocky mountains surrounding the forest. Liang Yi rebuked Chen for still finding time to flirt with Ling. Chen himself only laughed haughtily in response. Liang Yi had already tightly clenched his hands into fists. Chen began to swing and prepare to attack, telling Liang Yi that he didn't yet know how strong the guy was now after all the hellish training he went through for this. Liang Yi's entourage was taken aback. They said that they had never seen such confidence and couldn't believe that Chen was so confident. Chen grinned, also clenched his hands into fists, and shouted that the only one who would die today was Liang Yi himself. His gray eyes read determination and complete confidence in his victory. Liang Yi was frightened and prepared to defend himself against Chen's attack, standing slightly sideways and putting his hands forward. The young man swung his fist menacingly, after which the unexpected happened. The crowd stopped in bewilderment. They said that they heard a bone-crunching sound coming from the waist area, asking if Chen hadn't fully recovered. Chen indeed had something crunching in the waist area. His whole body was covered with shivering. He couldn't move. Even Liang Yi was madly surprised by this outcome, looking at the guy who was stunned. The guy's body was shaking. He told the guys that it was all because the blood in Kai was too thick, causing his lower back to crunch. He would literally need a minute to recover. He was so twisted that he couldn't stay on his feet and fell right in front of Liang Yi and his friends. They didn't expect such a thing, for they thought that Chen would really be able to put up a fight with Liang Yi today. They started laughing at the top of their lungs as they mocked him, saying that he was having trouble with blood. Who would doubt it? Liang Yi stopped laughing and said that this was the biggest joke of the year and that Chen was just afraid that he was about to be beaten by him. Liang Yi said that he was just laughing himself to death at him. Meanwhile, a sturdy guy with long hair tied in a bundle was walking towards Chen. He concentrated his blood and Kai power in his left fist and started swinging at Chen. The latter couldn't do anything because of the pain. The bully hit him directly on his face, pushing Chen a couple of meters away. His cheek immediately swelled from the blow. Chen clucked in annoyance. But a system window appeared in front of him. Resistance 100%, hit points +1, mission level D, damage 1 out of 100. Chen immediately became confident again and asked the guy about whether he had eaten today, hinting that his punch wasn't strong enough. Although Chen rubbed his reddened cheek, he was ready to take more blows on himself. Chen waved his hand in front of the dumbfounded bully's face and said that everything had to be taught to them. At this time, the crowd was finally angry with Chen. They all decided to attack him at once. With rage burning in their eyes, they all pounced on Chen together, shouting that they should kill Chen. Chen himself was beckoning with his hand at this time. They surrounded him, trying to kill him. The dark-haired guy with all his might hit right on Chen's face again, knocking him down. Chen started coughing up blood, but he wasn't planning on running away, for he saw the system window again with the damage points accruing. He continued to taunt the crowd, telling the guy that it didn't even count as a hit. He got to his feet and wiped the dirt off his face. The guy with the bundle on his head swung his foot and kicked Chen hard in the stomach. He coughed up blood again. He lost his breath. He fell down again. The damage meter increased by 1 point again. Chen proudly stood up from the ground, wiping the blood off his face, and smiling wryly, told the guy with the bundle to hit harder. Around him the leaves of the low bushes that framed the field rustled. Chen was taking elbow strikes to the face. The damage points gradually increased in number. Liang Yi's friends didn't stop either and kept hitting the guy. Chen's face was already covered in blood, but it was as if he didn't feel any pain and shouted that all these punches felt like just a massage to him, warming up the crowd more. 4 hooligans pounced on him at the same time, hitting Chen's back with their fists and feet. The hit points gradually increased to 9 out of 100. Ling was angry. She furrowed her thin eyebrows, her amber eyes conveying the full range of emotions she was feeling right now. She ordered Liang Yi to stop right now. The skinny and tall girl had already started walking menacingly towards the scuffle, preparing to step into it. However, surrounded by the 4 hooligans, Chen shouted to her that he would handle everything himself and she shouldn't worry. Ling immediately tried to contradict him but still listened to him and stayed put, trusting him. Chen himself thought that he was saving up damage points and Ling should not interfere with him. Liang Yi aggressively asked him why he was still trying to brave in front of Ling. He ordered his friends to break Chen's jaw so he would stop talking. His friend was brimming with motivation. He shouted loudly, aiming the full force of the blow at Chen's head. Chen fell on his back, shattering the stone ground beneath him. A crater was left at the site of his violent fall. He pretended to be in great pain and feigned a scream in agony. At the same second, the crowd ran towards him with lightning speed, preparing to attack again. Chen only thought that everything was going according to plan and Liang Yi's friends had fallen for his ploy. The entire battlefield was covered in Chen's blood. He continued to taunt the bullies, saying that even scratching his back hurt him more than their blows. Even though the guy's face was all bloody and scratched, he continued to taunt them as weaklings. His hit points had already increased to 36 out of 100. He didn't even get up from the ground, and from there he shouted barbs at them, like how they could hit him in the armpits because it itched there. He wryly asked them if they were trying to attack him or if they were just trying to pet him with such weak attacks. While they were kicking him, he was lying there smiling contentedly, because no one had the thought in their heads that he was taking all those kicks on purpose. Ling looked at him in surprise, raising one eyebrow upwards, opening her mouth in astonishment. She wondered that even though he was being beaten, his pulse and breathing remained dormant as if nothing was happening. Liang Yi took out a black smartphone from his pocket, scoffing, and said that such a sight should be seen by as many people as possible. He started typing something on his phone. Suddenly, all the students taking the exam received a notification accompanied by the phone vibrating. Liang Yi wrote to tell everyone to come see this performance, adding a laughing smiley face at the end of the message. He also attached a map with the location point of the fight. One of the students read the message and announced to everyone that Liang Yi had sent his geolocation, saying that there was something to see. All the students started pulling out their phones in the middle of the exam and saying that there was no way they would miss something like this. The wind was rustling around, shaking the crowns of the trees, tearing the leaves off them. One group of exam participants were already walking along the narrow forest path to the fight scene, asking what Liang Yi was up to. They were all walking with their phones in their hands. The second group ran to the scene with genuine interest. Someone even asked if it was a trap. After all, he treated the information with disbelief, but his friend told him that Liang Yi could get the plates effortlessly and in other ways, so he didn't think he needed them now. They also ran to the scene. One guy said that they should go there anyway, because who knows what might happen there, and suddenly they might find something worthwhile there. The crowd arrived at the scene of the fight between Liang Yi and Chen's buddies, but completely failed to realize what was going on there, looking at them in surprise. Chen was lying down relaxedly. He put his hands under his head, put one leg over the other, and asked Liang Yi's entourage about the fact that they had already surrendered. At that time, the hooligans had already stopped attacking him. They were tired and sat next to each other and tried to catch their breath, recovering their strength. They were all sweating, not understanding why Chen was not asking them for mercy yet. Chen crouched down beside them, raised his index finger up, and although his suit already looked dirty and shabby, he told them that they had only called out to the crowd to show off their worthless skills. The two guys who had attacked him stood side by side, barely able to stay on their feet. Their faces were sweaty. There was no way they could even out their breathing. The crowd in front of the mountain started laughing at them. They asked Liang Yi that this was the good show. Liang Yi couldn't believe what had happened. He was terribly angry and his confidence was gone. He was all nervous. He thought he had called the other students over to see his friends beating up Chen to taunt him and show the others what would happen if they crossed him. But Chen looked like he wasn't in the fight at all, and his guys were already so tired. He shouted at them to attack Chen again. However, they answered him that they were already exhausted completely and that Chen wasn't paying attention to their blows at all. They couldn't stand on their feet properly. They were wobbling from side to side. One of them tried to at least raise his fist, but he failed and said that he had no strength at all. Chen got up from the ground with ease and asked them why they couldn't finish the job since they almost succeeded. The bullies marveled at how he just got up easily, since any other person was already unconscious. The damage meter had already reached 78 out of 100. Chen mockingly patted the cheek of one of Liang Yi's friends and said that they had just made a laughing stock of themselves. He turned to Liang Yi, pointed his finger at him, and told him that since his entourage couldn't do anything, why didn't he try it himself and let him show what he could do? Liang Yi was terribly angry as he had just been ridiculed in front of everyone. The disciples were already laughing and talking about how Liang Yi was so weak that he couldn't deal with Chen. They were telling him that the show had really turned out well. Liang Yi gritted his teeth and couldn't believe what was happening. Ling sweetly giggled and said that Liang Yi wanted to make Chen look like a laughing stock, but he failed. Chen proudly stood right in front of Liang Yi, who had already started summoning a dark aura. The crowd started exclaiming that this was a top-level ability, that Liang Yi was going to attack and he wanted to kill Chen. Liang Yi's blood energy and Kai looked like a ferocious tiger that was menacingly showing all its fangs. He swung his fist at Chen. Ling worriedly told him that it was better to retreat because Liang Yi had quite a powerful technique. Liang Yi's punch had already caught up with Chen, however, it did not do any damage to him. The bully looked at his fist with misunderstanding, and it was easily stopped by Chen's hand. That absorbed all the damage. He looked at Liang Yi with a smile and asked, "Is that it?" System window, resistance 100%, hit points +1, mission level D, damage 79 out of 100.